Montana Territory, late spring of 1879, the wind cut sharp through the Judith Basin, tossing grit against the windows of a small ranch house where 31-year-old Isaiah Keene stood with his palm pressed flat against the glass. The mail coach was late. Again. He squinted toward the dirt road that twisted east toward Fort Benton, his heart beating harder than he liked to admit. His sons, Hamilton and Hayes, were outside chasing each other around the corral, laughing loud enough to carry over the wind. They had no idea. Inside, Isaiah's thumb absently ran over the edge of a folded letter in his pocket. His handwriting, rough and uneven, had traveled clear to Ohio and somehow returned this woman, a stranger, a woman who agreed to marry him. Sight unseen, he had not wanted to do it. He had stared at the advertisement in the newspaper for weeks, thinking it was meant for other men lonely, desperate men. But then his wife died last winter. Pneumonia took her in less than a week. He buried her under frozen ground while his boys cried themselves hoarse beside the grave. Since then, the ranch had gone quiet. The boys were too young to understand why their mama was not coming back, and Isaiah he worked till his hands bled just to keep something like normal for them. But he could not be both father and mother, not for long, so he begged, in a letter. For someone kind, someone patient, someone who could raise two half-wild boys with a soft hand and a steady heart, and she said yes. The stagecoach rattled into view, trailing a cloud of dust behind it. Isaiah stepped out onto the porch, heart pounding harder now. He wiped his palms on his trousers and squared his shoulders as the coach creaked to a stop. The driver jumped down and opened the door. She stepped out. She was small. Not delicate exactly, but slight in a way that made her look younger than she probably was. Her brown hair was pinned up neat, her dress plain and worn from travel. She clutched the handle of a single carpetbag so tightly her knuckles were white. She looked up at him, her eyes soft hazel, wide with nerves met his. She did not smile. She just froze at the bottom step as if unsure her legs would carry her forward. Isaiah moved first. He crossed the dirt fast, boots crunching dry gravel, and stopped in front of her. "You must be Odella," he said, voice low and careful. She nodded once. "Yes." "Odella Jennings." He held out his hand. "Isaiah Keene, thank you for coming." There was a long pause before she reached out, her hand trembling slightly as it touched his. Her eyes scanned the land, the house, the boys now peering around the barn. "I have never been west," she whispered. "I figured," he said softly, "but you came anyway." Her gaze dropped. "I didn't have anyone left in Ohio." Isaiah swallowed hard. He had not known what her story was, only that she replied to his letter with words that felt honest, kind. "My boys," he turned then, motioning toward the corral. "That's Hamilton. He's 6, Hayes is 4. They're loud, a little wild, but they're good boys." Odella looked toward them. The boys stared, curious but cautious. "They lost their mama," Isaiah added, quieter now. "Few months back." Odella nodded. She did not ask questions. She only watched the children with something unreadable in her face. He cleared his throat. "You're welcome here. We can take it slow if you need." She looked up at him again, and something in her eyes shifted, not fear but something close to it. Like she was holding herself tight to keep from unraveling. "I will do my best," she said. Isaiah gave a small nod. "That's all I ask." He reached for her bag. She hesitated, then let it go. He carried it into the house while she followed. The boys trailed behind them, whispering. Inside, the house was clean but quiet. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the stew he had made that morning. Odella stood in the doorway, her eyes moving over the room, wood plank floor, stone hearth, a worn sofa, and the small table where the boys ate their meals. "I set up a room for you," Isaiah said, pointing down the hallway. "It's yours. You can settle in, take your time. We don't have to talk about marriage today or tomorrow." She turned to him. "But you asked for a wife." "I asked for help," he said. "Marriage can come later." "If you want it," her eyes didn't leave his, "and if I don't, then you'll still have a roof and the boys'll still have someone who cares." She stared at him for a long moment, then her voice came low. "That is not what most men would say." Isaiah ran a hand through his hair. I ain't most men. Odella's shoulders eased just slightly. Then she turned and walked down the hall. That night she helped tuck the boys into bed. She read a story in a calm, even voice even though her hands shook holding the book. Isaiah listened from the doorway, watching the way the boys leaned against her without hesitation. When she closed the book and turned to leave, Hamilton whispered, "You smell like flowers." Odella froze. Isaiah stepped in. "All right, bedtime," but she looked back at the boy. Smiled just a little. "Thank you." She passed Isaiah in the hall, her face unreadable again. He said nothing, only walked beside her to the kitchen. She paused there, her hand on the counter, eyes lingering on the fire. "I am scared," she said, barely above a whisper. Isaiah nodded. "I know. I have never raised children. I will help you," she turned to him then. "Why are you being so kind to me?" He looked her straight in the eyes. "Because I know what it feels like to lose everything." They stood in silence. Then, slowly, she sat down at the table. He poured her a cup of coffee left on the stove. They did not say much more that night, but she drank the coffee, and when she went to bed she did not lock the door. Outside, the wind rose again over the hills. But inside, for the first time in months, the house felt full. Not whole. Not yet. But no longer empty. The sun came up slow the next morning, a pale gold pushing through the lace curtain in Odella's small room. She hadn't slept much. The mattress was firm, the wind had sighed through the chinks in the wall, and the quiet of the house pressed too close. Still, she rose before the boys stirred, washed up with the enamel basin and braided her hair back tight. The kitchen was empty when she stepped inside, but the hearth still held a faint heat. A worn apron hung from a nail near the stove. She slipped it over her head and began gathering what she could find: cornmeal, lard, a few eggs, and a wooden bowl on the shelf. The flour bin was nearly empty. She made note of it quietly. She was spooning batter into the skillet when Isaiah came in from outside, his collar damp with dew and a sliver of hay clinging to one sleeve. He paused in the doorway, eyes catching hers just long enough to trade something unspoken. "You're up early," he said, setting a bucket of milk on the counter. "So are you?" He gave a faint shake of his head. "Cows don't wait." She turned her attention back to the pan. "I hope you don't mind, I didn't ask about cooking." "Don't need to ask." "Smells good." The boys came in a few minutes later, barefoot and still tousled from sleep. Hayes rubbed at one eye and Hamilton hopped up on the bench without waiting to be told. "Morning, Miss Odella," Hamilton said, watching her with open curiosity. She set a plate in front of him. "Just Odella is fine." Isaiah leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching as she moved around the kitchen. She didn't speak much, but her hands were steady. When Hayes spilled his milk, she didn't flinch, just wiped it up and poured another cup. After breakfast, Isaiah took the boys out to tend the chickens and check the fence line. Odella stayed behind, scrubbing the dishes with hot water hauled from the stove. She found a broom and swept the floors, then opened the windows to let the fresh air in. The house smelled of dust and wood smoke, but beneath it, she caught the faintest scent of lilac from a bush near the back door. By midday, she had unpacked her few possessions: a Bible, a small mirror, and a faded daguerreotype of a woman who looked like her but older. She set it on the nightstand and sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded in her lap. A knock at the doorframe startled her. "You mind helping me with something?" Isaiah asked. He stood with a coil of rope in one hand and a pair of gloves in the other. She followed him to the barn, where a stack of firewood needed sorting. He showed her the size he wanted for the stove, then began splitting the larger logs with clean, practiced swings. She stacked while he worked. "I've never lived anywhere with this much sky," she said after a while. "You get used to it. It makes you feel small." His axe paused mid-swing. "Sometimes that's not a bad thing." She didn't answer, just kept stacking. The rhythm of it soothed something in her. "Back in Dayton, I worked in a linen shop," she said after a long stretch of silence. "The windows faced the street. I watched people come and go all day, never thought I'd miss that. You miss it now, not the noise, just the knowing where I fit." Isaiah set the axe down and leaned on the handle. "You don't have to know where you fit yet." You just got here. She looked at the pile they'd built together. I suppose that's true. That evening, after supper, the boys sat on the floor playing with carved animals while Isaiah repaired a harness at the table. Odella mended one of Hamilton's shirts, her needle moving in small, careful stitches. You any good with letters? Isaiah asked without looking up. I can read and write, she said. Why, boys'll need schooling come fall. I can't teach 'em much beyond counting cattle and reading brands. She nodded. I can help with that. He gave a quiet grunt of approval. Later, when the boys were asleep and the house had gone quiet again, Odella stood by the window in her room, watching the stars blink to life above the hills. She didn't feel settled, not yet, but there had been no sharp words, no harsh silences, just steady hands and shared tasks. When she turned away from the window, she found a small bundle on her bed. Wrapped in brown cloth was a bar of lavender soap. There was no note, but she knew who had left it. Spring gave way to early summer slowly, with green creeping up across the fields and the sound of frogs rising at dusk near the creek. The earth softened, and with it, something small began to shift between Odella and Isaiah, unspoken, but present. Like the warmth that lingers after a fire dies down, Odella had taken to walking the fence-line in the afternoons, a wire basket on her arm for gathering wild herbs and low berries. She'd found a patch of chokecherry near the west pasture and brought back enough to boil down for syrup. Isaiah didn't ask what she planned to do with it. He just sharpened her paring knife and left a kettle on the stove. One evening, while the boys were still out trying to catch grasshoppers in jars, Isaiah stepped inside, brushing dust from his sleeves. Ruthie wants to meet you, he said, setting a parcel on the table. Odella looked up from the basin where she was rinsing jars. Who's Ruthie? Neighbor. Lives near Flat Willow Creek. She was friends with, he paused, then said, my wife. Odella dried her hands slow. I don't want to step where I don't belong. You don't, he said. Ruthie's kind, bit nosy, but not mean about it. Odella nodded once. Did you tell her why I came? Isaiah sat across from her. Told her enough. She don't judge. The next morning, they hitched the wagon and drove out along the ridge trail. The boys rode in the back, trading a tin whistle between them. Odella sat beside Isaiah, one hand in her lap, the other steadying her bonnet in the wind. Ruthie's place sat low near the cottonwoods, with a smokehouse out back and a garden full of onions gone to seed. She came out wiping her hands on her apron, a wide woman with gray streaked hair and a voice rough from pipe smoke. You must be Odella, she said, not waiting for pleasantries. Come on in and sit, I made pie. Inside, the cottage was cluttered but warm, lace curtains, a painted plate above the hearth, the smell of cinnamon hung in the air. Ruthie poured coffee without asking and handed Odella a slice of apple pie. So, Ruthie said, settling across from her. You miss the East. Odella glanced at Isaiah, who stood by the door, arms folded. I miss the sound of bells, Odella said quietly. Ruthie chuckled. You'll get used to crickets instead. The two women talked while the boys chased Ruthie's cat underfoot and Isaiah stepped out to check the horses. Ruthie asked about sewing, about preserving, about headaches, and whether Odella had ever delivered a baby goat. I haven't, Odella said. You will, Ruthie replied. Ain't a life out here that doesn't eventually include something you never thought you'd do. Odella looked down at her hands, back home. The wind picked up again that night, rattling the shutters. As Odella turned down the lamp in her room, she found two folded bits of paper tucked under her pillow. Hayes had drawn a stick figure with a triangle dress. Hamilton's was a horse with her name spelled phonetically beneath it. She sat on the edge of the bed, the papers trembling in her hand. A soft knock came a moment later. You decent? Isaiah's voice was low. Yes, he stepped in, holding a folded blanket. Found this in the barn loft, figured your room gets cold. She took it, fingers brushing his. I think they're starting to trust me, she said. They are, she looked up at him. And you? He didn't answer right away. His gaze held hers, steady and worn. I trust what I see, he said, and I see you trying. She gave a small nod. That's all I know how to do. He stepped back into the hall. That's enough. Odella laid the blanket across her bed. It smelled of cedar and dry hay. She curled beneath it, the boy's drawings beside her on the nightstand. Somewhere in the stillness, she let her shoulders rest, not all the way, but more than before. By mid-June, the days stretched long and dry, and the dirt road that cut through the basin baked hard beneath the sun. Odella kept to the shade when she could, tending to the garden Isaiah had given up on after his wife passed. The soil was stubborn, but she coaxed green from it with patient hands string beans, turnips, a few rows of lettuce that wilted less now under her care. Isaiah watched her sometimes from the barn, not lingering, just pausing in whatever task held his attention. He didn't speak unless she did first. But when she asked for a better spade, he brought her two. And when she needed help turning the compost, he set down his fence post driver and did it without a word. One morning, after Hayes woke with a fever and a cough that made his chest hitch, Odella soaked linen in cool water and laid it across his forehead. She stayed by the bed, counting his breaths, dabbing his skin, whispering hymns under her breath while Hamilton sat on the floor nearby, quiet for once, cradling his brother's hand. When Isaiah stepped through the door and saw her there, he didn't look panicked, just tired in a way that settled deep in his shoulders. "Should I ride to the doctor?" he asked, voice low. Odella didn't lift her gaze from Hayes. "No, not yet, I've seen worse." Isaiah exhaled, slow. "You've nursed sick children before?" "No," she said. "But I nursed my sister till the end. I know what fever looks like when it turns." He didn't question her. He just brought in more water, boiled cloths, and sat outside the room with his head in his hands until she called him back in. By nightfall, Hayes was cooler, still weak, but his breaths evened out. Odella didn't leave his side until he was asleep, his fingers curled around the edge of the quilt she'd mended. "You didn't have to stay with him so long," Isaiah said as she joined him by the fire. "He needed someone," she said, folding her hands in her lap. "So did I," he answered quietly. She looked over, and for the first time there was nothing guarded in her face. No worry about saying the right thing, no doubt about her place. "You said marriage could wait," she said. "Do you still want to wait?" Isaiah turned toward her. "I wanted to give you room to find your footing. I've found it," she said. "I'm not sure I know what comes next, but I want to find out." He nodded once, then reached across the space between them and took her hand. His palm was rough, warm. He didn't squeeze. He just held it there, steady. The next morning, they told the boys. Hamilton grinned so wide his ears lifted. Hayes, still pale, blinked up from his blanket and said, "Does that mean she stays forever?" Odella leaned down and kissed his temple. "Yes, sweetheart. I stay forever." They married a week later, under the cottonwood behind the house. Ruthie brought bread and a jar of lilac water. The boys picked wildflowers and tucked them into Odella's braid. Isaiah cleaned up and wore a white shirt that pulled tight across his shoulders, and when he said his vows, he didn't speak loud, but every word landed true. That night, after the boys were asleep and the fire burned low, Isaiah and Odella sat on the porch steps in silence. The moon hung low and the wind was gentle. She leaned into his side, her head resting near his shoulder. "I don't feel scared anymore," she said. He turned, brushing a piece of her hair back behind her ear. "Neither do I," and not once did either of them let go. The wind had turned softer by late August, carrying the scent of dry pine and something sweet from the hills. The barn roof was patched, the root cellar stacked with jars Odella had boiled and sealed with her own hands, and the boys had started calling her Ma without being told. Isaiah had taken to rising before the sun again, but not to escape grief anymore. He walked the pasture with a quiet steadiness, boots leaving shallow prints in the dust, waiting for the sky to break open with light. That morning he came in with a letter clenched in one fist, the paper damp from his palm. Odella was sitting at the kitchen table, teaching Hamilton how to knit a row into a wool scarf uneven as a snake. Hayes was underneath the table, humming to himself, arranging flat stones into small piles. Isaiah handed it to her without a word. The writing on the front was unfamiliar tight slanted lines. She opened it carefully, eyes scanning the page. "My uncle passed," she said after a moment. "The one who raised me after my father died. He left a bit of land in Ross County to me, nothing much. Just a few acres and a house near the canal." Isaiah pulled out a chair and sat beside her. "You want to go back?" She looked up with a slow shake of her head. "I don't want the land, but I feel like I should go, set it right, sign the papers, see it once more." "I won't stay." Isaiah studied her quiet face, then nodded. "We'll go together. You're my wife," he said simply. "And those boys are ours now, they don't stay behind." It took 2 weeks to arrange the trip. Ruthie agreed to watch the livestock, and Isaiah bartered 2 heifers for rail passage out of Helena. The boys had never seen a train before. Hamilton nearly lost his voice shouting at each whistle, and Hayes pressed his face flat against the glass for half the ride. The land in Ross County was smaller than Odella remembered. The house sagged at the corners, garden long gone to weed. The neighbor brought over a crock of pickles and said her uncle hadn't spoken much in years. Odella walked through the rooms once, touching the frame of the door where her height had been marked in pencil when she was 12. They signed the papers at the courthouse. Isaiah said little, just stood behind her with one hand resting lightly at her back. When it was done, she gave the house to the neighbor's daughter who just married and was expecting. "He sat in that front room every evening," the woman said, brushing her apron with one hand. "Didn't talk, just stared toward the west." Odella thanked her, then turned to Isaiah. "I think he missed the horizon." They returned to Montana in early September, the leaves just beginning to yellow. The boys ran ahead toward the house as soon as they saw it, shouting to the chickens like they'd been gone a year. Ruthie had kept everything in order, though she left a note saying one of the cows had kicked through a stall board again, and Isaiah would need to fix it before snowfall. That night, after the boys were asleep and the last of the unpacking done, Odella stood by the window, looking out across the land that had become hers by choice. "I thought going back would make me feel something," she said softly. Isaiah ran his thumb along the curve of her shoulder. "Did it?" She turned to him. "It made me certain I won't ever leave this place again." He didn't answer with words. He just stepped closer, his hand sliding behind her neck, drawing her into a kiss that was quiet but full, like the first deep breath after a storm has passed. They slept that night with the windows open, the air cool against the quilts, her hand resting over his heart. By the first frost, the boys had started lessons at the table each morning. Odella taught them letters with a steady patience, and Isaiah joined when he could, reading aloud from a worn volume of poetry Hamilton insisted was boring, though he always listened to the end. Isaiah built a bench beneath the cottonwood tree where they'd married. Every Sunday, they sat there after supper. The boys sprawled in the grass nearby, Odella's head resting on Isaiah's shoulder. He whispered to her one night, "Never thought I'd get to feel full again." She laced her fingers through his and said, "Sometimes it just takes a second season." They never spoke about loneliness again. There was no need. And when spring came round once more, the garden came in richer than before. Hamilton's scarf was finished, crooked but warm, and Hayes had learned to tie his own boots. Isaiah carved a cradle for the child Odella was carrying, a girl, Ruthie swore, judging by the way she was carrying. They named her Margaret, after no one in particular, just because it felt like a name that belonged. The house grew louder, fuller, but never rushed. Every day moved at the pace of hands working, of bread rising, of fences mended and promises kept. And in every silence between those things, love lived. Not loud, not fancy, just there, always there.